Today we're going to talk about 10 tactics that you can use to move past a traumatic history when it's intruding into your present life. We all want a clean slate, and it would be nice to have been raised in a perfect home. And it would be nice to have never faced evil, it would be nice to have picked the perfect spouse, or to have heeded wisdom when we were younger, when we should have, or to have run away instead of stayed, or to die at an old age without facing any heinous evil at all. That would be nice. That would be great. But most of us don't have these luxuries. They've changed us. Our traumas, they serve as indisputable evidence that life just isn't fair. But these traumas aren't proof that we've been defeated or crushed or ruined. Can trauma inevitably change us? Yes. Can we become even better than we might have been in spite of its disastrous effects? Yes. And here are 10 tactics to do so. Number 1, take note of your triggers. Now, trauma usually reappears in the lives of survivors through these portal events. Okay, these events subconsciously resonate with the traumatic memory in the present, and they cause an emotional reaction. We call this occurrence, in which a traumatic event basically disrupts intrusively into the present. We call that a trigger. Okay, it's become a pretty colloquial term in the 21st century, but we are often more aware, however, of the reaction part of the trigger than of the portal event part of the trigger, right? Usually we'll just find ourselves caught up in whatever it is we've been compelled to experience, okay? Your spouse insults you. Your boss critiques you. Your friend betrays you. A scent, a sound. The result? Disproportionate rage. Consuming anxiety. Nuclear depression. And that trigger will be unpredictable, okay? That's why it's important to take notes about your reactions. And you won't always be able to do so in the moment, okay? You won't always be able to do so as you're doing it. You won't be able to take notes on your own traumatic reaction in real time, because usually we don't realize it was a trigger until after the fact, until after we've already hulked out, okay? So when you're triggered in a state of dissociation, whether you're triggered into a place where you're totally numb or totally overreacting or completely out of control emotionally or completely shut down, right? Ask yourself, what happened? Okay, what was the inciting event? Note that event. That's the trigger, okay? That is the trigger. And your trigger could be, that's the thing about trigger. People often say, they'll write a blog post about sexuality and they'll say, oh, trigger warning, we're talking about sexuality. And they think, oh, they're being sensitive to people who've maybe been sexually abused or something like that. And it's like, hey, listen, most people who've experienced sexual abuse aren't triggered by talk about sexual abuse. Okay, they're just not. Okay, they've been down that road. They know how to talk about it. Triggers, and this is something that popular trigger culture doesn't really take into account. Triggers are very often autobiographically specific. Okay, so there's this one example that I've referred to several times, recalled by a psychoanalyst in New York City named Richard Gartner, who was dealing with an adult male who was thrown into dissociative events whenever he would walk by yellow flowers on the side of the road, and later to discover that he was abused in a room as a boy with wallpaper that had yellow flowers, on the wallpaper, right? That's a trigger. Okay, a trigger could be a certain genre of music. It could be a certain kind of relationship, right? A certain activity, but it's going to be specific to you. Reading books, watching TV, a certain show, a certain genre, a certain literature, a certain hobby, a certain activity, a certain smell, right? Then you take these notes. You say this, trigger, okay? Then, as you progress in your journey, once you have these notes, once you have these triggers annotated, then you can experiment with gradually exposing yourself to that trigger in small doses to practice disarming the emotional bomb. But first and most important thing to do is to take notes. Okay? Instead of numbing the pain or judging yourself, you have to ask, what just happened? Why? Okay. After shootings, police are required to fill out a lessons learned report. Okay. Don't just judge the event, record it. What happened? What was the inciting event? Okay. Number 1 tactic, take notes on your triggers. Okay. Number 2, take your triggers in stride. Okay. It's very tempting after you've been triggered into an alcohol binge or an emotional outburst or a state of numbness to feel like you don't have any control over your brain or over your body. Okay. This sense of feeling out of control often mirrors the traumatic event itself, which took control from you. Okay. It can cause a sense of despair. Will I ever be better? Is this just diagnostic of the rest of my life? Am I seeing a prophetic glimpse of every day in my future in this one moment, in this one event, in this one trigger? Will I be hanging by my fingernails onto sanity for the rest of my life? Don't give that voice of despair the authority it demands. Do not do it. Okay? Keep taking notes. Remember, things do get better. Okay? The memory of evil never fully disappears, obviously, once it's been remembered, nor should it disappear. But you can learn to master the effects it has over you. Okay, it's not, or at least maybe master might not even be the right term. You can become more competent at engaging those things in real time. Now, it's not fair that you have to develop these competencies in order to master the effects that evil has on your mind and your life and in your relationships, right? You're a victim, and it's not fair. Okay. But this is the situation you're in. Now you must become competent at engaging these triggers, right? And take them in stride. Do not overwhelm yourself with guilt every single time you're triggered. That will be the most tempting thing in the world, to judge yourself. Okay? It's possible to be critical as you develop moral responsibility for yourself in the wake of these post-traumatic dysregulations, but you have to be very careful with handling yourself. Okay? Take your triggers in stride. It's like learning a skill. Okay? You can't, if you judge yourself too harshly as you learn a new skill, you're going to hate yourself and get too frustrated before the learning period is up, and you're not going to get good at it. Okay? That's why you have to be patient with yourself. So just like learning a new skill, you take each challenge as an opportunity to practice getting a little bit better at one little part of what you're doing. Okay? Like any skill, it comes with practice. Take it in stride, okay? Take yourself in stride and take care of yourself, okay? Number 3, here we're getting a little bit more tactical. Write your story, okay? It's important for you to create physical and textual artifacts of your trauma. And there are several methods that you can use to achieve basically different vantage points on your trauma and on yourself and on your future, okay? So I'm going to give you sort of 3 self-narrational tactics that you can use here, that I'm going to put them in a sequence, but you don't have to use them in this sequence. This is just one way that you could construe it, okay? So the first step, or the first method that you could use in writing your story, is you pick a day on which a traumatic or abusive event occurred and write about that from a third-person perspective, okay? Write about that day like a journalist, okay? A single day. Now, don't moralize the event. Okay, don't CNN or Fox News the event. Okay, just write about it like a journalist. Okay, just describe. And this is called writing therapy. Okay, just describe that event, and you will be, in taking a third-person objective journalistic perspective on your own story, it will be shocking what insights come to your mind and what themes you put together and how you choose to tell that story. Because even the most journalistic objective takes on a story are still interpretations. They're still takes. They still choose to center and decenter certain facts and not other facts, okay? So just tell the story journalistically, and even the way that you tell it will not only display things about the event, but it will display things to you about yourself and about your current state, which are very therapeutically helpful. Okay, so number 1, undertake this practice of writing therapy from this third-person journalistic perspective. Number 2, after you've journalistically sketched out the data of that day, you sketch the day as a narrative. Okay, so now that you have the data, well, now narratively sketch it, dramatically sketch it. Who are the main characters? What are the main themes? Right? If this day that you're talking about was like an episode in a TV show, what would the title of that episode be? What would the title of the TV show be? Right? What would be the primary emotions and motivations of these characters? What backstories could you explore to enrich the outside observer's understanding of the situation? Okay, this is called narrative therapy. Okay, where you essentially use the tools of narrative criticism to make sense of something phenomenologically, existentially. Third, so first you get writing therapy, then narrative therapy, where you essentially go from a journalist to a screenwriter, right, on your own story. Then you use those themes and those characters that you sort of dug up within the narrative therapeutic aspect, right? You use those themes and those characters as lenses to understand your current life and struggles, okay? So where there's certain themes, for example, are there certain settings that make sense of your current life? Are there certain themes that translate from the past to the present to the future, right? So like when I was a kid, my dad would pick my sister and myself up from my mom's house, and about 50% of the time, my dad and I would get in a screaming match on about some insignificant thing, right? And then he'd stop the car in the middle of the highway, and he'd throw my bags out on the side of the road, and he'd push me out of the car, and he'd drive away, and I'd walk back to my mom's house, right? Now, it's not a coincidence that when I fight with my wife today, 95% of the time, it's when we're in the car. It's when we're in the car. What themes can you draw out? What set pieces elucidate your current triggers and struggles, right? This is called existential therapy. So again, you don't have to go through this sequence, but this is a way you could do it. You could go from sort of a journalistic perspective to sort of a screenwriting perspective to sort of an existential application, okay? So you can use that sequence, and if you give it a sincere shot, you will gain a lot of insight, okay? So the 3 tactics that we highlighted so far: take notes on your triggers. Number 1. Number 2, take your triggers in stride. Number 3, write your story. Journalistic, dramatic, existential, right? Number 4, share your story with a friend. So as you construct an understanding of your past and your present self, share it with a friend who is going to listen to you compassionately. So even if you have a best friend that you trust, but that person usually gives a lot of advice and feedback, you might want to consider sharing it with someone else, okay? Share it with a good listener who cares about you. Share it with someone who you know exhibits compassionate qualities, so that you don't cast your pearls before swine, basically, okay? And on the same note, the first person you share the story with could be someone, it should be someone who wasn't involved in the original trauma or in the current dramatic unfolding of your post-traumatic experience, right? So find someone who cares about you, who can also remain objective as they listen to your story, because this is going to give their statements of encouragement toward you credibility. And that credibility that they give you as an objective third party will be an anchor when you find yourself in your own sort of back and forth volatile oscillations as you wrestle with your own trauma and as you process your own traumatic experiences, right? Because you find yourself and you find other actors involved in your post-traumatic life to be uncredible. And to have this third party person who's helping you, who cares about you, who can understand your story because they've been through something similar, or who just cares about you, it will give them more credibility and therefore more authority when you're not with them anymore. Okay, number 5, share your story not just with somebody who will listen and be compassionate with you, but someone who actually understands what you're going through. Okay, so after you've shared your story with someone who actually cares about you, find someone who's experienced something similar and share it with them. And ask them what tools that they found helpful for processing these themes, okay? First time I did this, the person I shared it with encouraged me to collect as many physical artifacts from the time of my traumatic experience so that I could utilize them for personal growth and for transition out of a season of post-traumatic growth. Okay, so I did have this collection of physical artifacts and totems from that time. And I ended up sort of therapeutically burning some of them, and I framed others, and those things became sacred objects of ritual for me. And that's just an example of something for me. But it was crucial for me to get that insight of attaining physical artifacts to help sort of ground and bear witness to the reality of my experience, and I could utilize them as totems to sort of sacralize my process of transition. And sharing your story with other people, there's an infinite number of tools that you could learn from these people who have been through the same thing you have, okay, or an analogous experience. So sharing your story with other people who have experienced the same thing will help you to learn what you don't know that you need to learn about post-traumatic recovery. So, number 6, don't let privileged people who don't know what they're talking about minimize your trauma. So when I was in seminary for my master's degree, a doctoral student sort of took me under his wing because I wanted to get my PhD, which I eventually did. But when I started sharing my story with him, I was like 21, 22. He was 28, 29, something like that. He told me, so I started sort of sharing my story with him. I had sort of just started processing some childhood trauma that I had gone through. And when I started sharing my story with him, he was like, hey man, you need to go to church. You need to clean the toilets. You need to serve there. And you need to submit to pastoral authority of the pastor there so that you can learn that life's not all about you. And God ordained this evil and suffering in the world for his glory. So you should be happy about that. And I was like, whoa, okay. I'm not talking to you about this anymore. And at first, my initial reaction to that was to say okay, and was to believe him. And it took me like a couple of days to realize, like, wait, that wasn't okay. And it was a good lesson for me to learn because the lesson I needed to learn was this, and I'll put it in the form of a rule, right? Don't bear intimate details to people who get off on bossing you around. Okay. Or people who just really aren't going to understand, because that experience that I had with this doctoral student who was mentoring me, that experience wasn't his fault. It was necessary for me to learn that I'm the only one who can narrate the details of my own story. Lesson learned. And from then on, I had to distinguish between safe people and unsafe people. And that distinction between safe people and unsafe people, that distinction, it actually can be kind of weaponized to ostracize people who are really safe from your life. And that happens with a lot of trauma survivors. It creates isolation, having that distinction. But equally dangerous is the inability to distinguish between sheep and wolves. Okay? So in order to survive in your post-traumatic life, you must be able to make the distinction among the people in your life between safe and unsafe. Okay? Number 7. Don't let a victim mentality hijack your peace. Okay? On the other hand, from this point of like, don't let privileged people minimize your trauma, don't let a victim mentality hijack your equanimity. Okay? So there's a sense in which identifying as a victim can actually perpetuate and exaggerate the original suffering that occurred. So making contact with these dark memories and emotions can become intoxicating, and it can yield this sense of entitlement to the compassion and the attention of others. Well, people owe me something now because I identify with this victim because I was abused in this way, right? Don't let that happen. So the goal of recovery from trauma is to become a person who can perform self-care, love for neighbors, love for family, and achieve a relative sense of peacefulness in life, okay? And there is usually an initial season when you first learn the term trauma, and that your counselor maybe or somebody tells you that you were a victim of trauma, that that a sense of your own victimhood is appropriate for an initial season, right? And a sense of anger and frustration and kind of dealing with these new words and emotions, right? But as time moves on, that sense of victimhood should become a descriptive tool rather than one which lords itself over you. So a way to explain what has happened is basically how the term victim or how the term trauma should function for you, rather than basically explaining a vision for what ought to happen next. So don't let your awareness of the fact that you've been harmed yield a sense of entitlement that forces everyone around you to accommodate your feeling hurt. So try to be as normal and giving and unentitled as you possibly can while facilitating your own recovery. You strive for generosity and selflessness, but one that comes out of a sense of self. Okay. So the opposite of victimhood isn't entitlement, but peacefulness, right? So if your identity as a trauma survivor produces more anger for a long season of time than peace, then you may want to reevaluate how much value that label is adding to your life, right? The goal of the words we use to describe our pain is equanimity. It's peace. It's strength of self. It's fortitude of mind, a fortitude of one's inner self. These realities, they don't try to rectify every little wrong someone transgresses against you. Okay? But you can learn to forgive. Okay? Impulsivity and entitlement are the fruit of a weakening mind, not a strengthening mind. Okay? An eighth tactic, celebrate every victory you can. So you will experience an inordinate preoccupation with your own failures. And you, as a trauma survivor, okay? And you will often feel like life is simply a series of failures, one after the other, and that you're just one big fat failure, okay? Amassing evidence for the fact that you must be judged. And consequently, all of life can become about fulfilling this sense of self-hatred about one's failures or disproving it. So you're violently and aggressively pursuing something that's actually false, okay? And the only way you can proactively escape this losing battle with failure is to celebrate the wins, man. Like a small moment of patience, an afternoon with friends, a little act of selflessness, a little joy that you can get through some little totem or ritual or habit in life. Tally all those things up, wrap all those things up, take notes on all those things. Just like you have to take notes of your triggers, take notes of your wins, man. Keep taking notes about your wins and wrap all that stuff up, okay? Keep hold on that, okay? Give yourself credit for all of that. Give yourself credit for being a good person. Tally up as much evidence as you possibly can for the fact that you are a good person and you are a strong person and that you have hope. Number 9, find a compelling purpose. Search for a mission that compels you beyond recovery from trauma, okay? Find a tribe, find a cause, find a concept, a group, a hobby, a virtue, a skill. Pursue it with everything you've got. Pursue something, okay? Make it something embodied. Make it something tactile. Make it something bodily and visceral, okay? Find your mission and devote your energies to that. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in a hurricane of therapeutic self-obsession, and you do not want that, okay? You do not want that. You want autonomy. You want self-control. You want self-governance. That's what you want. Not insecure self-governance, okay? Not insecure isolation. But again, going back to that term, equanimity, peacefulness, strength of inner self. And most therapists would be happy to see you week in and week out for the next 20 years. That's $5,000 a year in their pocket. And they're trying to scale that to make a business. Okay? I'm not saying all therapists are bad people. I'm just saying watch out for that trap. Okay? Don't give in to that. Find something higher to pursue. Okay? You can use therapy as an ancillary tool that facilitates getting back into real life, not building a new life based on a traumatic or traumatized or victimhood identity, okay? And number 10, and our final point, and this is something just more of a wisdom point for a certain subgroup of trauma survivors. If you're addicted to a substance, find a group and join that group, okay? You cannot fix yourself by yourself. And most trauma survivors struggle with addiction of some kind, mainly because addiction mitigates emotional overwhelm. Okay, so if you have indulged in your addiction at least twice a week for the past year, and that addiction is a substance, it's time to find a group. It is time. You have to go. Okay, find a group that focuses on achieving sobriety because you are trapped and you are blind to that trappedness. And if you're telling yourself right now, I don't need to go to that, I'm good, I can quit on my own anytime I want. No, go to a group. Find it, make time for it, Google it, okay? Find the meeting time, find the location, and show up. They will take it from there. Say, hey, I need help. This is my situation. Where do I go from here? Find the most trustworthy person in that room and confide in them. If you often drink alone, you compulsively binge on pornography, or if you buy black market opioids, or you take weekly trips to the casino and you're hemorrhaging thousands of dollars, you need to find a group. Okay, and this isn't being judgmental. This is just saying, hey, this is the reality of the situation. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, okay? You are most likely not the exception to the rule that you need to find this group. Okay, it doesn't have to be an anonymous group, okay? It could be a church group, okay? It could be the Samson Society. There's lots of groups out there, but find a group and go. Make time for that group and go. Your future self will thank you.